all you newcomers, I am Elaine O'Neill. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Farm Forestry Association. And today I am absolutely delighted to introduce David New of the New family. And he's going to be talking about the Nourse tree farm. Before I complete that introduction, just a few webinar or technical points to consider. I have everyone muted, and that's to prevent any sort of feedback within the webinar. If you're on the phone, you may also have to do a *6 to mute yourself. You have less control over that with the webinar. And that just prevents feedback while David's going through his talk. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box, which is down below where you can see your name, your attendee's name. Put them in the chat box, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to take those questions and I'll be asking the questions for David, to David, so we can have a to and fro there. That helps to manage the process. And then also, we are recording this. We're hoping that if there are no technical difficulties, that we'll be able to compile and post it on our YouTube channel and get the word out on this webinar series. So I have to say that I am absolutely delighted to have David say he would like to give this talk about their tree farm. The Nourse Tree Farm, for those that don't know, was the National Tree Farmer of the Year this year under the American Tree Farm System. The Nourse Tree Farm is a family affair. It's owned by the New family, which is David and his wife Dar, and his daughter Jen and her husband Jeff. And so David has taken it on himself to develop this talk, and he's talking to all and sundry, hoping to get the message out about tree farming and the powerful things that we do on the land, and also the wonderful thing, things that happen in a family when you do this embark on this kind of endeavor. So personally, I've had some great opportunities to get to know David. He makes the run down the I-5 gauntlet to come and talk to legislators on a fairly regular basis this year, and so we were in a lot of offices talking to a lot of people. And there was one particular commentary I thought was really remarkable. He had been talking to one of his elected officials and about the tree farm, that he was a National Tree Farmer of the Year. And we had a vote coming up on something that was important for tree farmers. And the guy stood up and said, the National Tree Farmer of the Year is in my district, and so I'm voting yes for this. And we actually got 100% of the House voted yes for that particular bill. Anyway, the power of David and his story. So without further ado, I want David to take it away and wow you guys with some wonderful information.
Well, thank you, Elaine. And thank you, each of you who has come to watch this. For taking the time out this evening to watch this presentation of our tree farm story. We are a certified tree farm with the American Tree Farm System, and among the things that I'm going to cover are how we deal with the wood, or our woods, the water on our property, how we use the property for recreation and manage it for the wildlife on the property. This is a picture of our family that owns the tree farm. There's me and my wife Dar, our daughter Jen and her husband Jeff Parker, and their two kids, Tyler and Alex. Our tree farm is located on the I-5 corridor, about 40 miles north of Seattle and about 40 miles south of Bellingham, where we all live. And it was purchased by Dar's grandfather from Pope and Talbot, which is a timber company, in the 1942. And when they owned it, they logged it in the 1930s, and there were a lot of big cedars on the property at the time. And here's an old cedar stump from back then that now has a spruce tree growing out of the top of it. Here's another old cedar stump that had a second growth cedar come up beside it, and a little branch grew out from that tree and landed on top of the old stump and took root in that stump and then became a tree in itself. And so this tree is a clone of that second growth tree there. Now, when Pope and Talbot logged the property, they used railroad to get the timber off the land. And this is a LiDAR landform image of the property. And you can see where there are old railroad beds on the property and also on the neighbor's property. Here's one here that goes up to the north end, one along the hillside here and along the hillside down here, going down there. And I've been looking high and low throughout the years. We found last winter along one of the old railroad beds. It's used to connect two rails together over a tie. So far, that's the only thing we found from the old railroad system that was from when they were logged. They tore it all up and took it away when they got through logging so they could use it somewhere else. Now, as I said, the property was purchased by Dar's grandfather in 1942, and he purchased it to be used as family recreation. So for starting in the 1950s, Dar's mother, Nina Hoyt, and her sister, Jeanette Turner, had a big garden there. Now, they lived in Seattle, so they drive up to the river every weekend and tend the garden. And when I first met Dar, we were students at Western, and Nina would bring her a big box of vegetables every weekend, and she continued doing that after we were married. And we continue to have a garden there today, and we bring trunkfuls of vegetables all back home with us. When Jen and Jeff got married, we went into dahlias in a big way at the river and did all the dahlias for their wedding, and we continue to have lots of dahlias and other things at the garden. The boys are getting into the work here, harvesting potatoes. We like to use the property for family get-togethers, family reunions. Every year we have a big pumpkin patch, and then we have a pumpkin party in October right before Halloween, when the grandkids and all their friends and their parents and all our friends and their grandkids come. Everybody gets to either carve or take home a pumpkin and play games. We have, in this case, we have every year a treasure hunt in the straw. And last year we branched out into launching of apples and pumpkins at target practice. I think that next year or sometime in the future, we'll build a trebuchet like this one that John Hendrickson has at his place down near Oakville. We also have 2 or 3 apple cider pressings a year. This was one we did last year. Mash the apples and press them. Here's Alex pressing them. It does taste good. Last year we made about 70 gallons of cider, and most of it we gave away to the people that helped us in the 3 different pressings. Jeff took some home to make hard cider with. And in the winter, we've been known, if there's snow on the ground, to take a snow day to go down and just play in the snow. Last year, there wasn't any snow, so the only thing we could do was walk by the waterfall. Last fall, Jen took a class from WSU Extension Forestry about learning about converting the sap from big leaf maples into syrup. We collected a whole bunch of this. That's the syrup, the cider, right? I'm not the cider, the sap right here. Alex decided he'd try to shortcut the system, and we did a whole lot of this, hours and hours of this, boiling it down to make almost a gallon of this. And no, the state of Vermont does not have to worry about us taking over their business. Now, it hasn't always been a walk in the park for us.
Hi, I'm Darnu, and this is Alex Parker. We are the third and fifth generations of property owners of this property. This property has been in my family since 1942. It's been a great place to come and play, to fish, to grow vegetables. It's just really meant a lot to us.
My name is Dave New. I'm one of the co-owners of this property. This property was owned by Dar's Uncle Bob until he died in 2004, at which time it was passed on to 10 heirs. We went through a 6-year process of settling his estate before we were able to keep it. The property was sold to a developer, but then the recession hit and he went bankrupt and couldn't take it, and so that gave us then the opportunity to buy it from the estate. I took a class from WSU Forestry Extension called Ties to the Land. Based on what I learned from the Ties to the Land class, our family got together and discussed the terms that we would like to have in a limited liability company. And with the assistance of an attorney, we were able to write those terms down in a legal manner and then record it so that the ownership was transferred from us as individuals to the limited liability company, which now owns the land. By having the land in a limited liability company, we can be comforted to know that it will not take the 6 years it did when Uncle Bob died to transfer the land from one generation to the next. It will be a more simple process.
My name is Jen Parker, and I'm one of the co-owners of this family tree farm. Succession planning is important to me because I watched my family go through the fairly painful process of settling a estate with many heirs. And I really appreciate that we have a plan in place that'll help maintain this as an open space within our family with a clear direction, and we have a forestry management plan that really sets out what this property can be for the future and our future generations.
I'm Kevin Zobrist, professor with Washington State University, part of the Extension Forestry program here in Snohomish County, Washington, and also a tree farm inspector and certified forester. As the saying goes, failing to plan is planning to fail. Right after mom and dad pass away, when the family dynamic has suddenly shifted, when emotions are running high, this isn't the time to figure out what to do with the tree farm. It isn't the time where you want to discover that no one's in a position to take on the tree farm, no one knew what mom and dad were doing or what has to happen next. It's not the time to discover that everybody has a different idea about what should happen with the land, and maybe some siblings want to keep it, some don't. If the siblings that want to keep it don't have the resources to buy out the others, that creates problems, and then it seems like the default is to simply sell it and divide up the proceeds. So succession planning can really be the difference between a family legacy and a family squabble.
Once we have land like this, the only thing we can do is save it and maintain it for the future. And I'm really glad we're able to do that.
Oh, I can't stress enough the importance of having a good succession plan. And there are several parts to that. First, it's important to have an open family discussion about the property, about what's going to happen to the property. Second, you need a legal mechanism for ownership and transfer of that ownership. In our case, we chose a limited liability company because that will allow us then to pass it on to the grandkids a bit at a time without having to record the property with this county, a county auditor each time we do a little bit of a transfer. And it's also important to have a continued family conversation about the management of the property. And I can't say enough about taking the Ties to the Land class developed by Oregon State University Extension Forestry that's offered periodically by WSU Extension Forestry. If you don't have a succession plan, I highly recommend taking that class. Now, when we took over the property in 2011, we needed to get it back onto a forested open space. Because of the fact that we had sold it to a developer, it was being taxed at a rate for residential property as opposed to forest land. And the state has a really good policy of requiring a forest management plan in order to be on open space forestry. And I didn't know anything about forestry at the time. So I hired a forester, Pete Blansett, out of Everett to write a plan for us. And after he looked at the property, he said, Dave, you have an over-mature stand of alder up on top of the hill, which unless you take it down, is going to fall down on its own, and then you'll have a real mess on your hands, and it'll be expensive to clean up and expensive to replant, and you'll be really behind the 8 ball. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here. When I was growing up, our family recreation time was revolved around my dad going after fish, and that's me pointing there. And we spent a whole lot of time in the National Forest, camping at the National Forest campgrounds and walking into rivers and lakes, or hiking up into the mountains, into the alpine lakes to go after fish. And so my notion of what a forest was something that nature would take care of by itself. We might put a few trails in ourselves, but we didn't give any consideration at all to planting trees in the understory or to managing invasive species such as reed canary grass or Himalaya blackberries, let alone clear cutting. That was the farthest thing from our mind. So we had a really long family discussion about what we should do with the property up on the stand up on top of the hill. And finally, we decided to take our professional's advice, our forester's advice, and hire him to manage a timber sale for us. And he did, and we decided that we would log 60 acres up on top of the hill and leaving a buffer between that area that we logged and a seasonal stream that flows through the property. Now, we needed to get across that seasonal stream when, in order to have access to get up the hill to log and to get the logs out. So the deal that we made with our logging contractor was that we would supply the bridge and the abutments, and he would put the bridge in place. Originally, he thought he could do it himself, but then he realized that the bridge was going to be much too big for him for any of his equipment. So we hired a really big crane to do the work. This crane came in, and it took them 2 hours to set it up. And then it took a half an hour to attach the rigging to the bridge. The bridge, of course, was a flatbed rail car with decking on it that came already pre-assembled. And then once the rigging was attached, it took about 2 minutes to lift the bridge up and set it on its blocks. And then it took them 2 hours again to take the crane down. And so if you count the time that it took, the crane time starts when they leave the shop and ends when they get back to the shop. So we had about 6 hours of crane time for about 2 hours of lifting. Now I want you to note the color of the gate here. So when we replanted, again, we enlisted the help of our forester. He found a planting crew to do it for us. And in fact, he had half a dozen other clients that were in the same boat as we were. And so through him, we got together and rented a refrigerated container and put all our trees in it and had the same crew do all of our properties. We planted around 29,000 trees on the 60 acres, a third of which were alder and the rest were primarily Douglas fir. And then we planted in 2015, and so that Easter then, and every Easter since then, we go up on top of the hill, and Dara and Jen stand back and take pictures of us 4 boys by one of the trees as it's growing. So that was the first year. Here's the second year. And you can see that the boys and the trees are getting bigger, and I'm just getting older. Now, as it turns out, Pete was right. This is a picture of some alder trees that we didn't log. They're down in an area that we can't log in the channel migration zone. And these trees are about the same vintage as the trees that were up on top of the hill. This picture was taken in 2010. This is a recent picture of those trees. We could have very easily right now have had 60 acres that look like this instead of looking like this right now. Now, early on, Dar bought me a wildlife camera for my birthday, and we put it out and instantly started getting pictures of the animals that are there when we're not. We have a whole variety of different things here. We have lots of deer pictures. Now these guys, we have our camera set up so they'll take a burst of 5 shots about a second apart. And they just decided that they'd practice sparring right in front of one of our cameras one day. Now Dar, being the retired school teacher that she is, thought it was important that the deer on our property learn how to read and read signs so they could know where to cross the road safely. We have kind of a love-hate relationship with our deer. They do quite a bit of damage, especially to the younger trees. And I've had people ask if they could hunt on the property. And last fall, one of Jen's coworkers asked if he could come on and go bow hunting. So he did, and his name is Shane McKinley, and he was on the property about an hour, and he texted me this picture. So I texted him right back with my big game picture. He ended up giving us a bottle of Crown Royal, and I think that's the only time that I've gotten a gallon of whiskey or half gallon of whiskey for $1. We have other wildlife on the property as well. Owls. Great blue heron. Baby robins. This wasn't taken with a wildlife camera, but what is it that woodpeckers do? You got it. We have lots of birdhouses that we've set out. Bat boxes, wood duck boxes. Now here's the real wildlife, real wild animals. When I saw this picture, I was pretty sure I'd seen one like it before. Sure enough, I had. Now, last summer we had a family of coyotes. And Dar, again, being the retired school teacher, thought this was, here they're all on a line right behind the mom, kindergarten coyotes, just walking down the trail, all in a straight line behind their mom. She had a lot of mouths to feed. She was really busy feeding these guys. So one day we caught her coming by in the morning with breakfast, at noon with lunch, and then in the evening with dinner. On another day, they decided they'd just have a romp right in front of one of our cameras. And so we just had a whole series of pictures here. I think my favorite pictures of animals on the property are of the bears. We don't get as many bear pictures, but they're there all the time. Now this is a series of pictures of a sow. I know it's a sow because here's her cub. She came right over to the camera, and then she pushed the camera over. The next 1,000 pictures taken by this camera were of the sky and the clouds going by. And yes, Tyler, a bear did tear that log apart looking for the grub to eat that were in it. Another bear decided that he wanted our apples more than we did. I was able to save the tree though by tying it back up, gluing it back together, and it seems to be doing just fine now. I continue to be amazed at the variety within the black bear species, how each is an individual. This poor old guy is kind of worse for wear. Here's a healthy looking specimen. Now this one, this is a really buff dude. Note the dense, short fur and just how buff this guy is. Just an absolute amazing specimen. Some of you may have seen this picture before. We like to call it desperately seeking Goldilocks. Last summer we found this fishtail up on top of the hill about a quarter mile from the nearest water. We have a run of humpback salmon that comes up Pilchuck Creek just adjacent to the property. Now, humpbacks only come back on the odd numbers years. They come back every other year. This is pictures that were taken in 2009. These are pictures that were taken this last year in early October 2019. Again, they don't come back on the even years. We won't see them this year, but we'll see them in 2021 again. Now, the humpies are out here, the pink salmon are out here in Pilchuck Creek. They don't go up the seasonal stream that comes through our property because at the time that they come up to spawn, there isn't any water in this stream. Now, this is a stream, the seasonal stream is one that Dara's grandfather and uncle channeled outside of the fields so that they could have better pasture land and hay land. But over time, along the lower field here, it filled in so that the stream lost its way through the reed canary grass.
My name is Kevin Zobrist. I'm a professor with the Washington State University Extension Forestry Program, as well as a tree farm inspector and certified forester. Active management is how we achieve our goals and objectives. There's a misconception that management means wall-to-wall clear cutting or trying to impose our will upon nature, but rather it's coming alongside nature, working with natural processes to achieve our desired outcomes of healthy wildlife habitat, healthy resilient forests, clean water, and sustainable wood production.
My name is Dave New. I'm one of the co-owners here at the Nourse Tree Farm. We're standing in what used to be a cattle field, and over time it became filled with reed canary grass.
My name is Jen Parker. I'm the 4th generation co-owner of this tree farm. We knew that the stream channel got lost in the reed canary grass, but we didn't understand that there were salmon in the stream until one year we were walking out here in the fall, and we were really excited to see a whole bank of eagles perched above our field. And when we went out to see what they were looking at, we noticed a whole bunch of salmon carcasses scattered across the reed canary grass. The salmon had clearly tried to swim over the top of the reed canary grass and had been captured by the eagles. And that's when we realized that the little creek that flowed through our property was a salmon-bearing stream.
Next spring, as we were permitting for a logging project up on top of the hill, we needed to put a bridge across the stream so that we could access to get the trucks in and out. And the biologist that was sent out for the hydraulics project permit as a part of the forest practice permit pointed out to us that we had some baby coho salmon in the stream. And then I realized that, gee, this really is a salmon stream and that we needed to do something to restore it. So I asked him, who should we talk to in order to get the stream in the lower field restored? And he said, talk to the Conservation District.
My name is Ryan Williams. I'm a habitat restoration specialist with the Snohomish Conservation District. The primary goals with this project were to reconnect the creek here on Dave New's property to help contain the water, but also to allow coho fish to come upstream. And so here we were trying to create a new channel, trying to increase habitat as well as improve the vegetation here and put in native species. So initially here we just worked with Snohomish Conservation District. We just brought in our own technical staff coming up with ideas for the project, and then we pursued grant funding through the Department of Ecology to do the actual stream restoration. So that paid for digging the channel, putting in wood, and then planting some of the buffer. And then on top of that, we found funding through the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, a program through the Farm Service Agency. And that paid for planting, and it also provides a rental payment to the landowner to restore their land.
My name is Carson Moscoso. I'm a habitat specialist with the Snohomish Conservation District. My reaction to seeing the restoration is amazement. Some of the trees have grown 10 feet since we put them in the ground, which is incredible over the first 3 years. We have willows that are 15 feet tall now and really starting to create that canopy that can make the reed canary grass disappear in a couple of years. And our conifer trees that are going to be that large wood recruitment in the future are really taking off now.
I think restoration is a critical first step for landowners to take. You know, your car can't move if the engine's broken down. And there are points of degradation in the system resulting from land use history, climate change, invasive species, and so forth. And these have disrupted many of the natural processes in the system. So restoration, it's not about recreating the past per se, but rather reestablishing and ensuring the integrity of key natural processes. Then we can come alongside nature as a partner and work with a functional system toward a positive and sustainable future.
I think the restoration is doing really well. I think the channel's still operating the way we are hoping it will, but we're still keeping an eye on it to make sure it's going to function well.
Okay, so here's a few shots of the construction of the channel. We had a work party come in that was organized by the conservation district, where people from the general public came in and helped plant trees. Some school kids came out and planted trees. And here's the restored stream going through the property into the lower field. Here's another view of it. Now, again, here's the restored stream going through the lower field. It's about a quarter mile from where the restoration project ended down to where the creek empties out into Pilchuck Creek. We had salmon coming up the stream right away and using the spawning gravel that was in this upper part of the stream up here. And then in 2018, we didn't have any fish come up. So I went downstream to investigate and discovered there was a series of beaver dams that were choking the stream out and didn't give any way for the fish to jump over them. There wasn't enough depth in the water below the dams, and there were a whole bunch of brush here. So I got a hold of Wayne Watney, the biologist who had permitted us for the bridge, who works for the Fish and Wildlife Department, and had him come out and look at it with me. And he said, well, you could put notches in the beaver dams just right before the salmon come up, and that way they could have a way to get through it. So last fall then I did that. And when I went out to do that, I discovered that the beaver were long gone. For some reason they weren't there. I think maybe the coyotes got them. And we put notches in some of the beaver dams, and then also some of the dams were washed out by flooding that happened in Pilchuck Creek. The lower part of our stream goes across the floodplain, and so there was flooding there that tore out the dams. This picture that I showed you before and this picture are at the same location, so the dam just got wiped out by the flood. So then in the week of Thanksgiving, the silvers came back, and I stood on the bridge and took this picture, took this short video. And this video, that same week, we had a crew come in from the Department of Fish and Wildlife that was doing a survey of all the streams around, seeing where the reds were. And they said, we had more reds in our stream this year than they'd seen in a long time. And this gal was taking samples of the fish that were on the bank so that they could look at the genetic diversity of the silvers that were in the general area. I don't know what the results of that were. So this spring now, we have hundreds of little fish like this, little silvers that are in the stream. And here's a picture of one right here. This fish is about an inch long. This is taken right underneath our bridge. And then this spring, the beavers came back in full force. So I set up a wildlife camera to take pictures of them. And they since now have built a total of 5 beaver dams, and they're starting to even take out some of our willows that were planted next to the stream for our stream restoration as well. But they have also created habitat for other species. We've never seen merganser before this spring. Here's a merganser that our wildlife camera picked up. And here's a heron. Now, there's a book by Ben Goldfarb called Eager. It's a really good read, and I recommend that you pick a copy up and read it. It's about the natural history of beaver and what happened to the North American landscape when they were nearly made extinct by the fur trappers in the 1800s, and about the efforts now that are being made to restore beaver to their natural habitats, and how the streams are recovering because of the beavers being put back in the natural habitat. So when we were given the state award, we thought it was important to showcase the people that have helped us. And so we had an open house in August of 2018 where the various groups that helped us, Farm Forestry, WSU Extension, the Conservation District, the Plant Materials Center, you may see and recognize Boyd Norton here from the forester, conservation forester, stewardship forester with the Department of Natural Resources. The tree farm system had a booth, and everybody was able to show the 200 people that came through to look at our property, then what kind of things that they can do for them, what the benefit, what resources are available for people on their property. We've had other programs here as well, one of which was an invasive weed seminar put on by WSU Extension, and where people actually paid money to come and learn how to pull weeds on our property. Now, last fall, when we learned that we were going to be the National Tree Farmers of the Year, they sent a videographer out from Washington, D.C. to shoot some video of us. He was here for 2 days, and he had a drone that the boys were really interested in. And then this now is the result of that.
The land was acquired by my grandfather. He would go around to different places and he would trade land for him doing the logging. He had pieces of property all over the place. I spent a lot of my childhood here. We were free to roam anywhere as we wanted, just as long as we came back when someone rung a bell. Dave and the rest of my family, we really wanted to keep it.
Our taxes were through the roof without being on open space. We needed to have a forest management plan. I didn't know anything about forestry at the time. In fact, I could hardly tell a spruce tree from a hemlock. So we hired a professional forester to write a forest management plan for us.
Dave picked up very quickly that he needed to find resources. That really made a difference because that forester helped him along the way.
I met the new family through the Coach Stewardship Planning course that WSU puts on. A lot of landowners won't go through that effort, and they will run into issues down the road with permitting or finding loggers, finding markets, and finding people to help.
And one of the things that's key about the tree farm program and Washington Farm Forestry is neighbor helping neighbor.
Those connections, that networking, I think was one of the most important aspects of the tree farm program. Dave was a sponge and he wanted to soak up as much information and education as he could. He was very proactive. The American Tree Farm program really gives them a goal to shoot for, and it brings well-earned recognition of good stewardship.
One year we were hanging out and looked up and we saw a bank of eagles. So we walked out to see what they were doing, and we saw salmon attempting to find their way through the weeds. And the eagles were sitting in the trees just picking them off as they swam up over the grass. So that was the starting point of when we decided we really wanted to try to do some habitat restoration, but the project was too big for us to just tackle on our own as a family.
The Snohomish Conservation District works with people on a voluntary basis. We can bring the technical resources, so engineers, habitat specialists like myself, farm planners who can help people figure out how they can manage their property better. The new family live on Pilchuck Creek, which flows into the Stillaguamish River. So they had a great opportunity to help restore this watershed. And this watershed in particular is really important for salmon recovery. So the work that they did on this property is really helping locally very much, but also helping the bigger region.
I really enjoyed watching heavy equipment come through and rebuild the channel, and now seeing it become a legitimate stream that's now habitat for salmon.
It's just clear that they are looking at this property not just as something for their family, but also for just future generations.
One of our goals for sharing this piece of property with the community is to see really what the woods is. it's just really worth sharing, like the salmon run. When we have brought other people's kids down here, they've been totally amazed at what it's like to see salmon going up a creek. They had no idea. I think we owe it to this whole community, to this whole area, to keep this natural and open and wild.
10 years ago, I didn't know anything about forestry at all. We could see that it was something that needed to be done, so we just burrowed down and did it. If we can do it, anybody can do it.
So we talked a little bit about how we use the property for recreation, how we take care of the wood on the property, the wildlife on the property, and the water that runs through it. Now, in the state of Washington, there are 70,000 parcels of land that are 5 acres or larger that are wooded. About 1,000 of them, 1,000 of us, are certified tree farms. There's an overlapping group that belong to the Farm Forestry Association, and there's about 4,000 people that have taken the coach planning class forest stewardship program from WSU Extension Forestry. So as you go down the road, you'll see these signs in front of the property. Now, if I were doing this to you as a group in person, this is where I would stand out from behind the podium and say that I've really come to appreciate all the good work that all of you are doing on your properties. And I'm really proud to be associated with all these signs. And yes, we have been given a sign of national recognition, and we stand in front of the sign and represent that sign for you. But it's what you all do behind the sign that's really important.
Green and white signs. The Washington Tree Farm program is not just about the sign. It's what's behind the sign. The commitment to the land, the determination to continue even when problems arise, finding solutions, learning from neighbors. It's the work that goes into planting a forest for the next generations. One that takes time, effort, and money. A forest that may not be old enough to harvest during your lifetime. It's about sustaining wildlife habitat. Having a diverse forest that can maintain species in different stages. It's clean water. It's taking care of the land. It's land that might be turned into blocks of houses, but instead is planted by hand. It's creating wood products that are sustainable, providing a resource that will ensure that forests will continue to grow. It's a renewable forest harvested so that others can be protected. And educating the public, showing the importance of farms. It's about family. It's about growing up on the farm, learning from others and growing as the trees grow. It's about learning to work hard alongside your tree farmer. Whether it's your mother, father, or grandfather. It's about multiple generations and history. And favorite spots that are passed down from one generation to the next. The sign is a symbol of the tree farmer, the family, the work, it's what's behind the sign. The Washington State Tree Farmers.
So I have two more slides here. The first shows a book that I acquired back when I was just getting started. It's a beginning book for managing your woods by Ann Larkin Hansen, Mike Severson, and Dennis Waterman. For most of you out there, it's well beyond what you would need to know, but it's a good, but if you know anybody that's going to take the stewardship class from WSU Extension, this would be a good companion read for that. But the main reason I bring it up is because the first chapter of this book, titled Why Manage Your Woods, is a chapter that I have been given permission by the publisher to share with anybody who cares to read it, a PDF copy of it. And it goes over the history of forest management in the United States, going back to the colonial days and bring it right up to the present, and tells us why we have a moral imperative to manage our woods as best we can. So I have given Elaine a copy of this, and you can either get a hold of her or get a hold of me, and we can get you copies of that first chapter to read. And I recommend this book for anybody who's just starting out as well. And finally, I'd like to give a lot of thanks to a whole bunch of people without whom we would not be anywhere near where we are. First of all, to Dar's grandfather, Leroy Nourse, and her uncle, Bob Nourse, who had the property before we did. Dar's mother, Nina Hoyt, who was instrumental in helping us keep the property. Tom Westergreen and everybody else in the Whatcom County Farm Forestry Association, especially those members who have hosted tree farm tours that I attended. I never failed to go to one of those without learning something new. Also, Kevin Zobrist and others at WSU Extension Forestry, Boyd Norton, the retired DNR Stewardship Forester, Wayne Watney with the Department of Fish and Game, Fish and Wildlife, Ryan Williams, Kristen Marshall, Carson Moscoso, and others at the Snohomish Conservation District, Pete Glancet, our forester, and Tammy Peralt, Jenny Knoth, John Hendrickson, Andrea Watts, Bob Obozinski, and Elizabeth Ide, and others from the Washington Tree Farm Program. Without the help of all these people, we would have been both figuratively and literally lost in the weeds. So thank you for watching. And if you want to get a hold of me, there's my contact information. And now I'll put my camera share back on. Should be able to see me now. And so Elaine, are you there?
I am here, David. Well done. I had a little bit of a loss in when we played the videos, but I think we can solve that problem when we go to the publication mode. I've had a couple of questions come in, and they're both from Bill Walmsley. And the first one was, what were your future plans for tree harvest on the remaining land?
We have about 30 acres across the road that was harvested in 1972 or thereabouts and was never properly reforested. And it's mostly alders with quite a bit of cottonwood in it as well. But there isn't much timber value in it because the trees weren't properly managed. And so they're a bunch of tall, spindly things, and we can't do much about it. We're just going to wait a few more years and see if we can get enough value out of them to replant with something else. The property that is down in the floodplain for Pilchuck Creek is in a channel migration zone, and because we own more than 20 acres, we can't do anything with that. We just have to let it go natural. That's the area primarily where our stream restoration has been.
And Bill had another question, and it was about tree losses for the drought in 2015, 2016, because that's right around when you planted, right?
Yeah, we were really lucky. The 2015 and 2016, yes, they were drought years, but in both of those years, we had our own private thunderstorms that came through right when they were absolutely needed and gave us enough water to help the trees make it through those first 2 years. And so now they're doing just fine. Thank you.
So my question to you, David, is do you do a consultancy so we can all get the thunderstorms when we need them?
Just do a rain dance, I guess.
Is that what you did? Do you do a rain dance?
No,
So are there any other questions that people have? I mean, I could certainly unmute if people wanted to ask specific questions. Just let me see if I can figure out how to do that. I am going to unmute all. So if people wanted to ask a question, let me see, unmute all participants. Okay. Why is this not working? So I'm unmuting people if you have any last minute questions.
Right now, at this time in our history, with a global pandemic, with a virus that's circumnavigating the globe, here they are, lowest to highest risk.
Somebody's also listening to the news, so we'll leave them muted. If you have any particular questions to ask, now is your moment. And I will have to say that I think this was just a beautiful story, and I want to say, oh, another hand came up. Hang on. So Rick Pabst had a question. His hand was up. So where did he go? I seem to have lost him. Rick, you had a question? Your hand is up?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Hello?
Yes?
Oh, great. David, what's your training? You came into this obviously late in life. I'm curious about your background. I've lost David.
David, we can't hear you. What did I do? You're self-muted. There we go. That should work.
Okay, prior to retiring, I worked as a civil engineer and land surveyor, so I had an engineering background. And I intended to say that back when I was talking about the forester that we hired. When you hire a professional, it's best to take his advice. And I've seen a whole lot of people in land use not take the advice of their professionals and really get themselves into trouble. So that was the straw then that pushed us over and made us decide that we did need to harvest rather than let the woods go bad.
Sure. Thank you very much, David. It was really an interesting show of your tree farm and the background and what you went through with the water restoration.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be able to do this.
Thank you, Elaine.
Oh, you're welcome. You know, Rick, if you want to tell a story like this, we'd be happy to have you also do one of these webinars.
So if there's anybody out there who would like to have an in-person tour, there's at the bottom of the last slide that I still got up there, you see my contact information, ddjnew@comcast.net. Go ahead and get a hold of me and we can give you a tour, and you can even go across the Golden Gate Bridge without paying a toll.
And there, Bill had one more question. He said, could you point out the bridge that was put in on one of the aerial photos?
It's around the corner. You can't see it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, what I'll do is go to the last slide here. You can see, let's see, you see my cursor is right here. It's just right around the corner, just around this set of trees right here.
Awesome.
No, I don't have that. I don't, an aerial of that. And it doesn't show up in the county or the DNR aerial photos either that are shot because it's underneath the trees.
Huh. Huh. Anything else? Okay, I thought there was one more hand here, but I think that that person has left. Oh, yeah, he's back. Dick, you had a question. Dick Alessio.
Yeah, Dave, a great presentation and congratulations on your awards.
Thank you.
I noticed you have in the photographs and especially the aerials, you have a lot of deciduous trees. Do you have any plans to reforest portions of that in conifers for whatever?
Yes, well, a lot of that, if we go to look at this last slide here again, this area down around the restored stream, again, is in the channel migration zone for Pilchuck Creek. And so we'll never be able to harvest there, but we have been working with the conservation district. They've been providing crews to come out and plant trees in the understory. We've been going in with cedar and hemlock and spruce in the understory, and so hopefully that'll grow up. As these trees fall over and die, we'll have an emerging coniferous forest come up along the stream down there.
I see. Well, that's a good idea to do that. Yeah, somewhere, make sure and put some where you can harvest them someday too.
Oh, that's what we did up on top of the hill, out of the channel. That's 60 acres that I showed you the pictures of before. We did that when we harvest across the road in the next 5 or so years. We'll do the same thing over there. Now, again, on this last slide, this area up here is our garden area, and these are mostly deciduous trees that are just planted for ornamental purposes in near our garden. The garden used to be in where the trees are now, and we moved the garden out into the field away from the trees so they get better light.
I see. Well, it's certainly a beautiful site, and you're really gone proactive to take care of it. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. We have a lot of help from the rest of the family too.
So were there any more questions for Dave? Any more comments? Just you can put your little hand up and I'll call on you, or you can type a question in either the question box or the chat box. No? Okay. Well, I think, Dave, that we've done a fabulous job, and you were right. You could hold I was amazed you could do that in 50 minutes. That was a lot of stuff to cover. So I just want to thank you again for, your willingness to share this with everybody, your willingness to share this with the world. And most of all, thank you for being basically the spokesman for a wonderful family and a wonderful family project here in celebration of tree farming. It's a really remarkable story, and it's very impressive and needs to get out there in the world. People understand what we do is wonderful for everything.
Well, you're very welcome, Elaine. And if anybody out there has another group that they'd like presented to, maybe at some point in the future when we're not stuck working at home, or if you do it as a webinar again, I'm more than willing to do it. I've done it over half a dozen times now. In 3 weeks, I'm going to do it for a local Rotary Club, for instance. So if you've got a group that wants to see this, I can do it live again.
All right. All right. And then there was one little note here from Bill, again, anxious to hear more about your maple sap collection. And so I'll just say to Bill, I am actually part of that, the maple syrup workshop group, we were going to put on a great thing this spring down at Pack Forest. That got canceled. And right now, you basically can't get on University, that's the University of Washington property. You can't get on University property just because everything is shut down due to COVID-19. We're hopeful that will open up again in the fall. So yes, love to talk about maple syrup. And I think that is going to be kind of an interesting emerging side opportunity for folks, particularly those that have a lot of land or area in that's affected by riparian zones that maybe have big old maples in them. You can have an alternative crop there. It's a lot of work, though.
It is a lot of work.
It's a lot.
It is a lot of work. As we can attest, with many, many hours of collecting, we collected probably almost at least 40 gallons of syrup to make sap rather, to make the 1 gallon of syrup. And it was a lot of boiling, but they make a small scale reverse osmosis system that we may go to here pretty soon so that we can get 3/4 of the water out of the sap, so it's beginning, so we can reduce the amount of time that it actually needs to be boiled.
Right. I mean, the idea that they're selling some of this maple syrup, because it does have a very unique flavor. It's not like Vermont maple syrup. It's much more vanilla. At least the one that I had a sample of during that same workshop that Jen was at, and it was very interesting. But they were getting this really high price per ounce because it was going only to specialty shops. Like, well, that's probably how much time it took.
Yeah, they didn't make much money on it. We've tried adding apple cider to it and then boiling that down. The apple cider starts out with the Brix factor of about 10, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so we mixed that in with, and that gave it a different flavor entirely. And when we boiled some down, we ended up with some that tasted more like molasses actually than syrup. But we've tried different ways.
Well, these are all sort of different alternatives. Okay, yep. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you all for coming, and we will figure out if there's any technical difficulties in the recording. We'll try to resolve those, and we will post this because I think it's worth advertising to the world, all these really good things that we're doing. And it was a very good talk. Thanks again, Dave. We'll talk to you all soon.
Yeah. Okay, Elaine.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.